Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about concepts around taxation, tax take, and overall tax take, and how governments can sometimes successfully increase public expenditures and also reduce taxes at the same time. So just want to talk a little bit about that and explore some of not only the concepts, but the practicalities of this. Now, some of you may have heard of something called the Laffer, Laffer, the Laffer curve. It's like an economic chart that's meant to depict where even though taxation rates lowered, that the overall taxation take, that is the total amount of tax gathered, increases even while tax rates are lowered. So how can that be? I'm surely that's not possible, is it? Well, the theory, and to a large extent, by the way, the practice, is that taxation contains within it, or the level of taxation contains within it, a certain amount of disincentive. So there's a certain amount of economic exchange that happens within the community that's based on barter. So one guy says, "Well, I'll mow your lawn if you fix my car," or I'll give you my eggs if you'll give me your milk, in the farm belt and things like that. So once the reason people do that is because it's not worth their while spending the money they've earned that has a high tax on it, or that maybe there's a high goods and services tax on purchasing items like eggs, whatever, at the supermarket. So instead of paying the tax, it becomes a better economic decision to do barter exchange, your eggs for my milk and that sort of thing, or you mow the lawn and I'll fix your car. So these are things that there are millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of these exchanges that go in any economy all the time. But there comes a point where if you lower the tax, it's no longer worthwhile people doing that, or certainly not to the same extent. So instead of doing that bartering, if the tax rate is lowered, they say, you know what, it's not worth me doing the exchanging the eggs I might as well buy the lawnmower myself, or buy the eggs at the store, and so on. So you get more economic activity in that sense, giving people move from barter to actually spending money. And so that boosts the amount of taxes taken in overall terms, even though the tax rate has fallen. There are other things too, like people who are working at a job and they're paying, for example, 50% tax, and they're thinking, well, why should I work any harder? Why should I make more when the government's taking 50% of it? So it becomes like a disincentive. Also, some governments tax interest that you earn on money you've got deposited in a bank, and some of those tax rates are quite high. So people think, well, I won't save. I won't bother saving, not if the government's going to take that money from me, that sort of thing. So then when the tax rate falls, they think, you know what, I think I will save there. So the government, by reducing the tax, actually gets more tax overall, because now they get something instead of nothing. And also people that are working a 50% tax, say the tax rate falls to, for example, 25%, then they decide that, you know what, I might work harder, I might work another job, I might work longer hours, or I'm going to try and get a better job that pays more, and so on. So by doing this, by reducing the tax rate, you end up with much more economic activity, a reduction in barter, black market type stuff goes away, or it reduces. And say there's a lot of tax on cigarettes or something, or gasoline, petroleum. So instead of going to Mexico to buy the fill up your tank, and because the tax rate was reduced on your filling up your car, you'll do it in the local petroleum station or gasoline station. So these are examples of how because the tax rate was reduced, the economic activity increases, and thus the overall tax take is increased in spite of the tax rate being lower. Now, there's a point at which, and I suppose it varies depending on the economic transaction and the status of the economy and standard of living. And so there's other variables here to consider. But there's a point at which when you increase the tax rate, which people say, you know what, it's not worth my while doing such and such because I have to pay too much tax. At that point, economic activity is going backwards. And then the other side is where you really reduce the tax rate to such an extent that you just can't gather enough money in to pay for roads and hospitals and so on. So there's a magic point at which, and this could even vary year to year, so I'm not sure it could be adjusted that rapidly. But there's a magic point at which the tax take is maximised without having a dead hand on productivity and economic activity and that sort of stuff, and where it again achieves the maximum tax take for the least negative impact on the economy. So there's a magic point there, and like it could be 29% tax, let's say income tax as an example, 29% tax or 32.5%, whatever it might be. There's a point there at which that's achieved. You go beyond it, the tax goes higher, then you're killing off economic activity. If you go too much below that, then you're not gathering the tax you need to supply essential public services. So it came back now to say Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister, the new schoolgirl Prime Minister of Britain, she ought to get together with that Prime Minister of Finland and go twerking in the nightclubs or doing lines of coke off the bar or something. So anyway, the Liz Truss, Prime Minister Liz Truss, is saying that she's going to lower taxes to try and boost the economy and kickstart some, get some activity into the economy and get it growing again. But she also wants to spend, so she says, spend more money. Now, bear in mind, Liz Truss is not a dictator. The Prime Minister in Britain is not a dictator. It's government by cabinet and supposedly by Parliament. I mean, you could be forgiven for saying Parliament's been cast aside pretty much, but it's governed by cabinet. So he's not a dictator, and the cabinet has to agree. Now, given they're all getting their marching instructions from the globalists, it kind of is academic to where the decision comes from and who mouths it to the public and how many propaganda media outlets run protection for the government that is following the globalist script. But Liz Truss has talked about increasing expenditures on things like the hospital system, for example, and other things. So it is possible to do that by reducing taxes. Now, given the state of the British economy after the COVID lockdowns and the devastation, quite unnecessary, malicious devastation that caused for so little gain, in fact, zero gain. So if she can boost the economy and get it going or by lowering taxes, nothing wrong with that. If the tax take does indeed increase, as in the overall total tax gathering, if that does increase, then that indeed can be spent on other things. But Britain's also got quite a large debt. I get the feeling that the modern concept of debt that's held by the Western countries, Britain, the United States, that the globalists are indirectly funding globalisation and say, well, we'll loan you all this money provided you put the globalisation project in place. And then we'll make our money through monopolies and oligopolies and cartels later on down the track. But now this is money well spent to crush white people and impose the globalist project against the will of the Western white folks, and we'll just make sure that in the years to come, everything they need, from water to power to petroleum to transport to housing, anything has to be rented from us, and we'll have monopoly power on that, and that's how we'll make our money. So I think those debts really don't exist in any reality. I think they've been or they've been forgiven and written off already by the globalists, and they're only shoveling money into the West like this, just to install and impose the globalist project. But coming back to, is it possible to lower tax rates and increase public expenditures? Yes, it is. Not in every single situation or circumstance, but it may be possible in Britain's case. I've got my doubts to some extent, but it may be possible, and so it can be done. Whether or not the British managed to pull it off, given the parlous state of the economy there, that's another matter. But let's wait and see. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.